And we are live. It's our 10-minute warning, everybody, for today's N10-009 Network Plus Study Group. We're just getting things started here, making sure everything is the way it should be here in the studio. Thank you for joining us. Of course, if you are watching this on a replay, you could always stay here for the pre-show. We will be starting the actual show at the top of the hour. So once we hit 12 o'clock. Noon time for me, which is the Eastern time zone. All right, we need to pause a couple things on the screen there. There we go. This is the time where I need to check everything, so our recordings are going. You can see my Cylon's going down here in the bottom right. The stats that I see for the streaming look very good. I turn the streaming on probably 10 minutes before we get started, 10 to 15, just to warm things up. That is not what happens with streaming or any type of network communication. But I like to see that it's consistent, at least during that 10-minute period. And so far, we're in very good shape. Cache is at 3%, which is normal. If that goes higher, then I know something is afoot, something is awry. And then about 6 megabits per second, 6 gigabits per second, 6 megabits per second upstream is what I'm sending to YouTube. YouTube is repackaging all of that and sending it to you as a stream that is best suited for whatever device you are watching. So I don't send you a direct stream of this video. The video goes to YouTube first. They re-render usually into multiple types of formats, and that's what you receive. So you're seeing this about 10 to 15 seconds after I send it. The re-rendering process that is done by YouTube is very, 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 very fast. So that's always good. It's been a busy week. We always have something going on. There's always interesting things happening. So I'm looking forward to this. I wrote some of these questions as late as yesterday. So I definitely had my Network Plus hat on yesterday doing all of this. And I think it's worked out pretty well. I like the questions today. I like the information we'll be covering. And of course, you're always welcome to ask questions. If you would like to join us and stick your virtual pin into our map that we have here, we're looking to see where people are connecting from. We got folks checking in the United States, in the EU. We've got folks in Egypt, it looks like, or somewhere close by. It's hard to tell on the granularity of this map is not exactly the most precise, but we get it close. I mean, you got a dot that's enormous. It's the size of the state of Georgia. So it's pretty big. Thanks for joining us. Hey, chat room. Hope everybody's doing well. Ready for Network Plus today. This will be good. Let's see what else I have going on here. We're coming into the end of the year, end of the calendar year, and it's been a lot of fun watching everything happening with the getting everything together. We just went through Halloween in the United States. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. We're going to roll that into Christmas. Then there's the new year. So this is a fun time. It's a busy time. It's a time where we can kind of sit back and think about what the next steps are and what we're doing next. It's always a good time. GK says, hey, while live streaming, add some peaceful music sounds. You'll notice that none of my videos have any music on them, either on demand or live. And that's because of the numerous challenges, legal issues associated with streaming any type of music on the internet of any kind. So I just don't. And then I don't have a problem with that. Then it works great. It's fine. So that's why there's no music. The only music is on the bumper, the very beginning, the intro and the outro to my podcast. The podcast that is made of this. I have a podcast version that's created of the audio that we do here today. So that's the only time you really get any music, because it's hard to pull a podcast, but it just creates too many problems. And even if you've done all of the right things, you've licensed music, you have paid for the license, you are absolutely legally able to use that piece of music, and it's still a problem. So instead of going through the problems, we just don't worry about it. So hum to yourself, make up a song in your head. And that's the song we're using today. So that's what we do. Hello, Mal. Good to see you again. Hope things are well in St. Vincent. It looks like you're going to be avoiding this next storm coming through, aren't you? We are expecting a hurricane or tropical storm, perhaps, to hit Florida or somewhere close to us in the next week or so. And we just don't know where it's going yet, but it's sort of how things go. Here in the tropics, that's sort of how things are. So that's we'll have to, do we have spaghetti models right there? Let's see. The National Hurricane Center, if you look over my shoulder, shows that we're currently hanging out in Central America, and we'll be heading up through Mexico and then into the Gulf of Mexico. And from there, all of the models go a little crazy. Nobody knows exactly where it's going from there. I do like that the intensity guidance has dropped quite a bit. Look, this guidance shows that it's currently going through the tip of Florida. Others have it going into the northern part of the state. Just all kinds of interesting things going on with that. So we're sure looking forward to that. There's another model, completely different, going a completely different direction. That's the GPS tracks, whatever those are. This is why they don't want us out here in the world to look at spaghetti models. The smarter people tell us just ignore those. We'll tell you where it's going. And that's what the official view from the National Hurricane Center is. And that makes sense, I guess, if you want to focus on that piece of it. So that's what I'm watching over the next week. The important takeaway for you is that I have a different or a scheduled live stream Wednesday of next week. We'll have to see what happens. So that could change a little bit. There was a question in the chat room about where stuff was. So are those different cameras / views in the second to left monitor? Yep, that's my video switcher. This is the console of the Blackmagic video switcher I have in front of me. It's TV Studio 4K, Television Studio 4K, I think is the name of it. To have it there. So that's what that is. So that's just the output, the HDMI output from the video switcher. So it's its own self-contained, purpose-built appliance, if you will. And that's what you're seeing there. This is the video output, the HDMI output from a streaming server. Really, it's a streaming device also from Blackmagic Design. The device itself is on the lower right in my 19-inch racks that are on the left and right of me, which you can't see because they're sort of lower down. Where's my light? So to the right, let me get rid of this for here. So there's a 19-inch rack on my left over here. You can see there's a switch and there's a mic or a headphone amp, and down on the right side, there's another 19-inch rack on my right. They are closed in, so you can't hear it because there's quite a bit of noise in there. I wonder which one's louder right now. Probably this one. If I open this up, yeah, you probably can't hear it too bad either. So I do try to purchase equipment that is already quiet that I could run there if I wanted to. So, yep, that is my video switcher, and that's why you see all the cameras there. That's what I'm looking at to make sure that all my cameras are ready to go, and indeed they are. So we're in pretty good shape there. Do I drink bottled juice? No, I do not. I don't drink any bottled juice. I like the water. I like water. I like a flavored water, maybe. That's as far as we go with juices. And no additional sugars for me. You don't want me hopped up on more sugar, right? Let's not do that. Let's just let's have it the way it is. We are bouncing around enough as we sit here. Less than a minute to go before we get started. Remember that we do have questions that you're able to ask. If you have questions for the second hour, you can always do that. What supplements do I do? I'll take supplement. What are you? I'm not taking supplements. I'm not on any type of juices. We're not doing anything too extreme. I just a little bit of exercise and eat properly, and I think you're okay. Let's see if I can figure out what's next on my list here. Looks like I do have the build stats of my PC. Well, it's a Mac. I have a Mac Studio 2 Ultra. So it's even an old one. Time to upgrade. Speaking of time, look at that. Top of the hour, everybody. Let's do a live stream. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November 2024 Professor Messer N10-009 Network Plus Study Group. This is the study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives, and you're able to answer live and online. We'll go through this together and see what questions you might have. As we go through this live stream, we have a lot of information to go through. One of the things that I like to do is to give you an overview of what we are planning before we get things started here. So if we are to look at, here we go, where you can go to have this live stream available on your device, be able to answer questions as we go. You can follow the links that are on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and that's where you'll be locking in your answers. In fact, if you were to go there right now, there's a nice map of the world. These are folks in the pre-show that came in and put their virtual pin into our map of the world. You can see people are joining us from all over. We've got folks that are joining and have said hello in the chat room. So nice to have you there. Thank you so much for being there. Let's do some interesting tests of this. Let's see if this is really working the way we would expect. If you really did go out to professormesser.com/QA, there will be a question waiting for you. If you go to this question, it asks, which of the following would be most associated with the I of the CIA triad? That's an I that's there. It's a capital I. It looks like it could be a 1 or an L. It is not. It is I. It is I of the CIA triad. You do fortunately have a number of options to choose from. And I'll remind everyone now, our standing rule, of course, in the live stream is please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Instead, we are going to answer this question with the answer of WPA2 encryption, QoS, digital signatures, MTUs, or VLAN IDs. So see if you know what the answer is. If you think you do, follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. We'll be coming back to that question in just a moment. Well, this is our N10-009 study group. I should probably update the graphic I have here. It's really the N10-009 version of this study group. We do Network Plus study groups at least once a month. So we're always doing something Network Plus related here. And of course, we have our weekly Network Plus pop quiz questions that we send out. But of course, when we're not here on a live stream, our entire course is available on our YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, that'd be a great thing to go over and do right now for us. professormesser.com/YouTube. We would absolutely appreciate that. We also have weekly pop quiz questions for Network Plus. Usually on Tuesdays, you'll find a summary of those available on the service formerly known as Twitter at professormesser.com/Twitter. And then we have also the same question, but with a pretty picture over on Instagram, professormesser.com/Instagram. Well, you've already seen here references to 2 different Network Plus exam versions. So let me give you an overview of currently our state of the state as it comes to Network Plus. There are 2 versions of the exam that you could take right now. One of those versions is called the N10-008. It was released on September 15th, way back in 2021. This is a version that will retire on December 20th of 2024. That's December 20th. That's a month and a week or so from now. So this is an important date to keep in mind. If you are just starting your Network Plus studies, this is probably not the version you want to take. This is an older version. It's still just as valid as the newer version that has been released, but it goes away in December and it goes away forever. So if you have been studying for this certification for the last 6 months or so, and you're working your way up to pass that version, you can keep doing that at least for another month or so. up until December the 20th, but that's the last day you can possibly take that exam. This is a 90-minute exam. You could get a maximum of 90 questions. You might get fewer than 90 questions. The score that you need to earn is a 720 on a scale from 100 to 900. And the exam consists of both multiple choice questions and performance-based questions. So you have different types of questions, and we will do both types of questions in this live stream today. So stick around for that. There is a newer version of the Network Plus exam. This version is the N10-009. This was released on June the 20th of 2024. So this has only been around for a number of months. This is the most recent version of the exam. It is estimated to retire somewhere in the fourth quarter of the calendar year 2027. So you've got 3 years effectively before this version goes away, which is kind of nice. Then you don't have to worry about hitting any type of deadline. Again, it's a 90-minute exam, 90 questions. So the structure is identical. The score you need to earn is identical to the previous version. And the type of questions you get are identical to the previous version. So if you're planning to start your studies now, make sure all of your study materials are for the N10-009. That is the version that you want to be able to use. Also let you know that we, of course, have our entire Network Plus course for both the 008 and the 009 available on our YouTube channel and our website for you to watch. Every minute of every video is available, as it is with all of our training courses. Nothing is kept behind a paywall. Nothing's held back from you. You can watch everything with no registration. You simply show up and watch the videos. We, of course, have downloadable versions of those videos. We also have them in MP3 format. We have course notes. We have other study materials that might help you. If you'd like to learn more about where you can get those, check out our website, professormesser.com/netsuccess. So a little bit to go through. We do these live streams every month, as I mentioned, and immediately after we're done, they're available for you to watch on YouTube. It's done automatically. But sometimes you like to be able to listen in when you're in the car. Maybe you're working out in the gym. You can't really watch a screen, but you would like to have an audio version. I do publish an audio formatted version of this in podcast format, so it's very easy to add to your favorite podcast listening program. You can also find this on your favorite streaming media site. So if you're on Spotify, for example, you can simply search for Professor Messer or look in your favorite podcast index, and you'll certainly find us there. If you don't, let me know, and I'll add it to whatever index you happen to be using so you can find us a little bit better. If you'd like to add it yourself, you can always head over to professormesser.com/podcast, and you can add our A+, Network Plus, and or Security Plus study groups. About a day after we are done here, you'll notice that the YouTube video description will be updated with a list of timestamps that tell you exactly where the questions are, where the answers are, and even summarizes the information we go through in the second hour. This does not happen automatically because it can't. Something like this is something where you need someone who's watching and able to map what's going on the screen with what people really need to know. And fortunately, I've got my marketing manager, Lori, who's watching this on the replay. Hi, Lori. Probably at 2x speed, and going through and putting down all of the timestamps. So thank you, Lori, for doing that. And of course, this means that you can find everything you need very quickly, not just on this study group, but any of our previous study groups as well. When we're not here doing a live stream, you can find us over on our Discord. Head on over there, professormesser.com/Discord. A fantastic community of folks is there that can help you understand networking concepts. We have folks studying for their A+, their Security Plus, and other certifications. And you can open up your own study room and be able to manage everything that goes on in that study room. Just another great way to help you study for your exams, help you learn just a little bit faster. We'd love you to join our community as well. Head on over to professormesser.com/Discord for that. Eventually, you'll need to take this Network Plus exam, and you can certainly go to the CompTIA website and pay full price for this exam, or you can head over to professormesser.com/vouchers if you happen to live in the U.S., Canada, or a U.S. territory. This gives you discounted vouchers, so you're not paying full price for those vouchers. We have them available for all of the CompTIA exams. And if you purchase the voucher on my site, you get a copy of my Exam Hacks ebook. This is an exclusive ebook that you will not find anywhere else. It is only available if you purchase a voucher or if you purchase a success bundle. You cannot buy it separately. And it has a list of tips and tricks that I've accumulated through the years for the study and for taking your exam. I even have tips in there on things you might want to do during the exam that are strategies that might gain you a few extra points. It's all available on my website, professormesser.com/vouchers. Let's now have a look at that question I asked earlier, which asks, which of the following would be most associated with the I of the CIA triad? Is it WPA2 encryption, QoS, digital signatures, MTUs, or VLAN IDs? And your answer, 65% of you say the answer is digital signatures is what the I in the CIA triad would best represent in this list of items. 16% of you said WPA2 encryption, 12% said QoS, only 3% said VLAN IDs, and only 2% said MTUs. So let's talk about a little bit about the CIA triad. CIA stands for three different terms. It is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are the three fundamental principles, really, of any type of security on a network. So this is more of a security question, but of course, A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, and really any certification has a security component too, just as every part of our network does. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as the AIC triad as people try to differentiate it, because some people confuse this for the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States, and this is not related at all to that particular federal government arm. This is a standalone confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those are the three. So don't worry about that piece of it. In the I in the CIA triad, we're referring to integrity, which means the information we're sending across the network has not been changed. Nobody has been able to modify anything associated with that data. The information that we are receiving is identical to the information that was originally sent, and that nothing has been changed between point A and point B. And we have a number of different ways to ensure that level of integrity. One of the ways to do that would be something like digital signatures, because a digital signature not only allows you to confirm who sent this particular piece of information, but it also tells you if anything in that piece of information has changed. You're able to verify that the information you've received is identical to the information that was sent, because you're able to verify that digital signature. So in this particular question, the 65% of you were absolutely correct. It is indeed digital signatures. WPA2 encryption, I would best put that into the C category, the confidentiality category of the CIA triad, because that's what encryption does, after all, is makes things so that nobody can see what's inside. It hides the information in a way that's effectively in plain sight, but still protects everything that's in there. So that is where I would put WPA2 encryption. QoS, the ability to have quality of service or be able to have different applications run at different priorities across your network, would probably, I would fit that best into the availability arm of the CIA triad, because you want those critical applications to continue to flow regardless of anything else going on your network. And I'd also probably put VLAN IDs and MTUs into that same category as well, into the category of availability. Those are core networking configuration items. So that is a good example of where you might fit different components of security and networking into the different arms of the CIA triad. And of course, on your N10-009, you need to know what the CIA triad is. So hopefully that's given you some insight into some important information that you need to know for your exam. That is our rewind question of the month. That allows us to ask a question we did earlier and make sure that you're able to get in and answer the questions that we have available to you. Let's do some new questions now. The next question I have for you is not a multiple choice question. The question we just went through, it was multiple choice, where there was a question and there were multiple options to choose from. So you had these 5 different things you could select. This meant that even if you didn't know what the answer was, you had a 20% chance of getting it right. You could just guess and you'd get the points. Well, CompTIA wants to make things a little bit harder than that for you. And so what they've come up with is a different set of questions that you will get on your exam that CompTIA calls a performance-based question. A performance-based question is one that is not multiple choice. It's anything but multiple choice. It could be fill in the blank. It could be doing something at a command line. It could be a matching question. It could be a drag and drop question. It could be one where you have to put things in a particular order. Really, as long as you know the topics on your exam objectives, I like to say it really doesn't matter how they ask the question, you will be able to answer it. So I have for you today a performance-based question that hopefully you'll be able to go through. This is a multiple step performance-based question that asks, match these protocols and port numbers. It's not quite as easy as that though, is it? Because what I have for you are 4 different scenarios, 4 different things that we need to accomplish on the network. I have a list of a bunch of protocols. In fact, I have 7 different protocols listed here. We only have 4 different items. That means that 3 will be left over once we match these up. And then on top of that, I have 7 different port numbers, which means we have to match up the description of what we're trying to do with the protocol that we would like to use and the port number that is associated with that protocol. So there you go. There is a lot of this and being able to work through the details of it. So let's see if you know these. For those of you listening in on the podcast, here are the 4 different descriptions that we're trying to match. The first one is configure a switch from the command line. The second one is automatically obtain an IP address. The third is set the clock on a database server. And the last one is transfer files between Windows devices. Those are the 4 things we're trying to accomplish. To be able to do these 4, we need to choose 4 of these protocols. The protocols that are listed are LDAP, RDP, SNMP, SMB, DHCP, SSH, and NTP. And then for the 4 protocols that we are going to select for these 4 different descriptions, we need to match those to port numbers. And the port numbers that I have listed are 445, 161, 3389, 123, 389, 67, and 22. Whew, there is a lot to go through here. This is almost like a multi-step, multi-answer performance-based question. It's almost like we're looking at 12 different questions all at once coming through. Then we have to match all of these up to see what makes sense. Now, if you think you know the answer, as always, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, you want to head over to the link that's on your screen, go to professormesser.com/QA, and see if you can submit what you think the right answer might be. I'm watching some of the answers come in right now. Of course, you don't have to type all of this in. You could just say, if you think they're already in the right order, you could say 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D. You'd be done. That is not the right answer, but you could do that. You don't have to spell everything out anyway. And the reality is this is a fill-in-the-blank answer online. I will not be tabulating results, so it really doesn't even matter what format you put it in. Just put a format that you're most comfortable with, and you can put and submit all of those at professormesser.com/QA. See if you know what these happen to be. I'm looking at a number of answers that are coming through. I kind of have to fill it out myself. I forget what the answers were for this one. This was almost, I wrote this question probably over a week ago, which is a lifetime in my world. So hopefully I can remember what these answers are. I have the answers right here though. It's a little bit of a cheat sheet I have in front of me. We'll get to go through it together as you are submitting these answers. Submit those online. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. See what you think the answer might be for this one. This is one also that we really do need to know these protocols and port numbers. It's very important. But notice this question kind of throws a little bit of a curveball in there, because if you spent all of your time simply memorizing the protocol and what port number it's associated with, you only have half of the answer to this question. So that's by design. And in fact, your exam will probably be that way as well. Very rarely on the exam do they ask you a straightforward trivia question. For example, they might ask you, what port number is used by Telnet? They're never going to ask you a question like that. Instead, it might be something like this, where there is a description and we need to figure out from that description what we would use to be able to accomplish that function. So let's see how you did with this one. We'll start at the very top of our list to configure a switch from the command line. Have a switch from the command line. If you've ever worked on a command line with a switch, you've usually connected to that device across the network. And if you want to connect to that device across the network, you'll want to use a protocol that is secure. And in this case, it is a secure shell, or SSH. SSH is this console that we can use across the network, but everything's encrypted. We don't need a VPN. We don't have to load any certificates. There's nothing fancy you have to do. You just simply use the SSH protocol, and the encryption is always built in. If you want to be sure that information is getting across the network using the SSH protocol, then you'll want to be sure the port numbers are open, and the port numbers for SSH is port number 22. So anytime you see someone needing to perform command line functions across the network, you're logging into a Linux server, you're configuring a firewall, you're setting up a router configuration, you're modifying a switch. That's all done at the command line, and you're using SSH to do that over port number 22. Next on our list is automatically obtain an IP address. The protocol that you would most commonly use to automatically obtain an IP address is DHCP. That is the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP actually uses two different port numbers. Only one of them was listed in this list that we have here, port number 67. Port 68 is also used by DHCP, but I only asked you for one of these, and that was the only one available in this list. You'll notice that 68 was not in the list. Therefore, there was no confusion. Or at least, hopefully, there was no confusion. That was the idea anyway. So DHCP over port 67, that is what we would use, at least initially, to automatically obtain an IP address. Next on our list is set the clock on a database server. Set that clock. One of the best ways to automatically configure the time and date on any computer, not just a database server, but any machine, is by using the Network Time Protocol, or NTP. That was option 7. NTP is the option we wanted there. And if you need to configure a clock over the network using NTP as the protocol, then you'll be communicating over port number 123. So there's another one that we have to know. And lastly, transfer files, or as we say here, files, between Windows devices. Transferring those files. So if you're on a Windows computer and you're transferring some files to another Windows computer, what do you use? What is the protocol that is in use in that one? It's the Server Message Block Protocol, or SMB. SMB is widely used in Windows to connect to a share, to print to a network printer, to transfer data between systems. It is the protocol that Windows uses to be able to perform those file level functions across the network. SMB. And the protocol for SMB commonly uses the port number 445 to be able to transfer that data directly between two devices. So those are the 4 descriptions, protocols, and port numbers that we were looking for. Configuring a switch from the command line is SSH using port 22. Automatically obtaining an IP address is DHCP, port number 67. It also uses 68. Setting the clock on a database server is the Network Time Protocol, or NTP, port number 123. And transferring files between Windows devices is the Server Message Block, SMB, using port 445. Well, we know that that's the case. There were some left over. For example, LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is another one that can use port 389 to be able to commonly connect to and pull information from an active network directory. This is commonly used to perform authentication functions or look up any information that might be inside that particular directory. We also have another protocol we did not use, such as RDP. Port 3389 is commonly used for RDP. That is the ability to look at and manage and even control a remote desktop in a Windows environment. And then lastly, we have SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol that commonly uses port 161 to be able to make that happen. A lot of people are saying, but I can use RDP to transfer files. Well, you could, but the best option for this one, and the one that is very clearly the best option for transferring files between Windows devices, because not every Windows device is configured to allow or even accept a remote desktop connection, but every Windows device has the server message block protocol turned on. So SMB is clearly the best answer by far to transfer files. In fact, being able to transfer files over RDP, if you've ever done it before, sometimes not the easiest thing to accomplish. There's a few stumbling blocks, a few hurdles you have to get over. Once you get it going, it's going. But one thing that works every single time, that's on every single Windows computer, is indeed the server message block. That really is your best answer for transferring files between Windows devices. Hopefully, you've gotten some familiarity with some of these port numbers. There are obviously more port numbers that you need to know for your exam. Make sure you refer back to the exam objectives to know exactly what every single port number is that you might want to know for your system. Hopefully you've done pretty well on that performance-based question. Let's now jump back to multiple choice questions and see how you do. This next question asks, a user's workstation has received an APIPA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? So already you can see, well, there's an issue. I guess there is an issue. We've received an APIPA address. So already you should be thinking in your mind, what of the following would be the best next steps to resolve this issue? Would it be to add a gateway of last resort? Would it be to enable STP on the user's switch? Would it be to add a static route to the user's workstation? Would it be to decrease the DHCP lease time? Or would it be to update the default DNS server? The answer you were looking for may not be in this list. So we have to think a little bit broader about this question that asks, a user's workstation has received an APIPA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Add a gateway of last resort, enable STP on the user's switch, add a static route to the user's workstation, decrease the DHCP lease time, or update the default DNS server. If you think you know the answer, put in your answer right there on that link. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. Let's see if you know what you would do as the best next step to resolve this issue. These are very common terms, by the way, on the exam. You will often see what is the best next thing to do. What would be the best option of the ones that are available to you? What is the first thing that you should do for troubleshooting? These are common phrases that are used on the exam. So you should already be accustomed, or at least becoming more familiar with that terminology and how they ask those particular questions. So make sure you are familiar with this. And in fact, some people in the chat room are thinking, oh, I could do this. I could do something else. I might want to start somewhere else. That wasn't the question. The question is which of the following of the things that are on the screen, which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? That's the question we're trying to answer. And that means that you will need to choose one of these 5 options. Figure out what they happen to be. Lock in your answer. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. Let's see how you did with this question that asked, a user's workstation has received an APIPA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Is it add a gateway of last resort, enable STP on the user's switch, add a static route to the user's workstation, decrease the DHCP lease time, or update the default DNS server? So let's see what you chose before we look at maybe an explanation of what this question is really talking about. We need to see that 38% of you say you would decrease the DHCP lease time. 27% of you say add a static route to the user's workstation. 17% say that you would update the default DNS server. And 11% say add a gateway of last resort. So 4 of these answers are in the double digits. Only one answer, single digits. 5% of you say enable STP on the user's switch. So these are really the questions that we're trying to answer. But first, we need to understand, why is this a bad thing? API-PA addresses. API-PA, this automatic IP address process, is one that should only occur if your normal DHCP process is not working. In fact, the last question, we even talked about using the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, or DHCP, to be able to automatically assign IP addresses. But if there's a problem with that process, you will not get an automatically assigned address from your DHCP server. You'll instead get an automatically assigned IP address from your local computer. And that's because there's some type of issue communicating with or receiving information from your DHCP server. In fact, very often, if you have a DHCP server that's run out of addresses, then it's not going to be able to provide you with another one. Let's say that the pool of addresses on your DHCP server is 100 addresses, but you've had 100 people come in this morning and they've used up all of the available addresses, and the default lease on your DHCP server might be for a 24-hour period. That means that you're now completely full. That DHCP server will not hand out any more addresses until that 24-hour period, and that lease time is finally up, and it frees up some of those different addresses. So that can be a bit of a problem if you need to get onto the network. So you'll probably want to go to your IP address management application, IPAM. It's a great way to understand where these addresses have gone and how they have been configured. You might then also want to modify the lease time. Maybe handing and keeping hold of an IP address for a 24-hour period is a very long time. What if, for example, you were running a coffee shop? People are coming in and out of the coffee shop. You're probably rotating through people at least once an hour, if not faster than that. Some people come in for 5 minutes, they get an IP address, they walk out the door, and now if you've locked that IP address up for a day, you now have nobody that can use that particular address. So if you're a coffee shop, you might want to have your lease times down to an hour. That might really improve the availability of IP addresses in your DHCP pool. A really great way to do it. So lowering that lease time can now free up more of these. Now, if you're in an office and everyone comes in every day and you're the same people at the same desks doing the same thing, well, maybe 1 hour lease time is too small. Maybe 24 hours is fine. Maybe 7 days is good in that scenario. And maybe what you want to do is add additional IP addresses to the overall pool. That is what we are focusing in with this particular problem. We received that API-PA address because something has gone wrong with that DHCP process. And so if you are part of that 38% that said decrease the lease time, that will improve the number of IP addresses in the pool, and hopefully then you'll be able to get an actual legitimate IP address instead of the link local and temporary API-PA address. That is exactly the case. Now let's look through these other answers that you had. 27% of you said add a static route to the user's workstation. When you first turn on a computer and it receives an IP address, it receives everything it needs to be able to communicate not just to the DHCP server and other devices on your local subnet, but it is also assigned a default gateway that allows you to communicate outside of this network. A static route is unnecessary. And in fact, when you're initially receiving IP addresses, adding a static route, you're a little bit ahead of the game at that point. There's no need to add a static route. You don't even have an IP address yet. So adding static routes are first, can you imagine adding static routes to all of your users' workstations? That sounds like a bad idea. I'm sure it can be automated and can be done, but another thing that you would have to manage, and in most cases, your default gateway handles everything that you would need to have done. So adding a static route is not going to fix this problem of API-PA because you're still not going to be able to receive a usable and routable IP address. Next, we have 17% of you that said update the default DNS server. I know that the default answer for most of us is it's always DNS. In this particular case, it's not DNS. In this particular case, the problem wasn't us being able to resolve a name or an IP address from a DNS server. Our problem is simply getting an IP address to begin with for our local workstation. So this is a very good example of how updating the default DNS server won't change anything with you receiving an API-IPA address. All it'll do is point to a different DNS server, which, by the way, doesn't help you very much if you're trying to communicate to a device that's outside of your local subnet, because obviously API-IPA addresses are link local. They won't communicate outside of your local subnet. We also have 11% of you that said add a gateway of last resort. This is something very commonly seen on routers where we have a big routing table, but at the bottom of the routing table, we would like to have a route that is used when nothing else matches. It's commonly done at a remote site, for example, so that if anything is coming through that router, at least it will always be sent out one particular link. That's great for routing, but has nothing to do with receiving a IP address that we can use to communicate to other subnets. So gateway of last resort is not going to help us at all. We will still receive an API-IPA address, and we will still not be able to communicate outside of our local subnet. And then lastly, only 5% of you chose this one. Enable spanning tree protocol, that's STP, on the user's switch. Spanning tree protocol is great on a switch to prevent any type of loops on the network. If somebody happened to plug in the cable to the wrong place, you could bring the entire network down by creating a loop on a switch network. And spanning tree protocol ensures that that won't ever happen. Even if you do accidentally plug in a wrong cable to the wrong port, it will know that a loop has suddenly occurred, and it will prevent that loop from occurring on the network, and your network will continue to be up and running. That's great for stopping loops, but it does not prevent you from receiving an API-IPA address. In this particular case, the only answer that has anything to do with resolving an API-IPA address assignment would be to decrease the DHCP lease time. That would be a great way to free up additional IP addresses that could then be assigned by the DHCP server, and we'll never see that pesky API-IPA address again. Whew, that was one where we had to go a couple of steps to get to the final answer. And by the way, that is a very common strategy on the exam. That's a very common way to ask the questions from CompTIA. Make sure you're ready for anything when that shows up. So we mentioned in that question about a gateway of last resort. And you may have even seen already that our next question is about a gateway of last resort. Specifically, the question asks, a network administrator has configured a gateway of last resort. Which OSI layer would be most associated with this change? Would it be layer 7, layer 4, layer 2, layer 1, or layer 3? A network administrator has configured a gateway of last resort. Which OSI layer would be most associated with this change? Is it layer 7, layer 4, layer 2, layer 1, or layer 3? If you know the answer, answer it down here at the bottom. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you happen to know what this one is. Let's see. Yes, there's no names on there. We're just going with the numbers. I just wanted to put 74213. I put the word layer in front of it just so we would be clear what we were talking about here. Hopefully you're familiar with your OSI model, something that's pretty important as you get into networking, something you're going to use all the time when communicating with other folks and talking about all of these. So hopefully that's given you some ideas into ways that you could be asked about OSI layer. Maybe you're familiar with this one already. And now that you understand a gateway of last resort, I gave you a little bit of an overview on that last question. Maybe that helps you answer this one. By the way, that's a very common strategy on the exam, is that topics on some questions might allow you, or at least mention to you, some topics that will remind you what the answer happens to be. So make sure you are familiar with those. If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. Use the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock that in. Let's see how you did with this one. The question again asks, a network administrator has configured a gateway of last resort. which OSI layer would be most associated with this change? Would it be layer 7, layer 4, layer 2, layer 1, or layer 3? Let's stop our poll and see that 76% of you say the answer is layer 3. 12% of you say the answer is layer 4. And then we go to single digits, 9% for layer 2, 1% for layer 7, 0% for layer 1. Sad. We didn't really do very well from that perspective, did we? So let's see what the answer is in this case. If we are working on a router and we're dealing with configurations inside of that router that deal with IP addresses, subnet masks, or default routes, default gateways, gateway of last resort, anything associated with that, we are indeed talking about the network layer, which is also OSI layer 3. OSI layer 3 is everything associated with a router or with routing at the IP level. So anytime you're dealing with the IP protocol, internet protocol, you're putting in an IP address of 192.168.1.1 or one of the others that we have already talked about today. If you're fragmenting these particular packets through the network and being able to fragment those frames to go through different networks, that is certainly a great way to do it. And the network layer of the OSI model is the one that does that. Layer 3, whenever we talk about IP addresses, whenever you see anything relating to a subnet mask, whenever you see someone changing the IP address of a DNS server, they're modifying IP addresses, routes, or anything relating with the ability of an IP address to communicate through the network, you're talking about OSI layer 3, the network layer. And indeed, 76% of you said that's the one you would choose as well. That is OSI layer 3. That is the right answer, what we were looking for. There were 12% of you that said layer 4. Layer 4 is dealing with a layer just above the IP address. It would be the port number, for example, is a good example. So a TCP or UDP port number, we just looked at a bunch of those with our performance-based question today. Those would be layer 4 in they operate. So if you have a question where somebody says someone is configuring a firewall to disallow port 3389, so they're disallowing Microsoft's remote desktop protocol, that would be a layer 4 task because you're doing that at the port level. Layer 2, we're dealing at the MAC address, the data link layer for MAC addresses, being able to work through that. So layer 2 is where we would look at, but in this particular case, we weren't talking about a MAC address. Configuring a gateway of last resort is an IP address, so it fits squarely into layer 3. There's no MAC address or data link address associated with anything in that question. And then you've got layer 7, got 1% of the vote. Layer 7 is the application layer. In this particular question, there was no application in use. We were only dealing with the routing functionality and specifically the gateway of last resort. And layer 1 is our physical layer, dealing with the signal that is going across a piece of copper, a piece of fiber, or across the air itself. That is definitely not what we were talking about in this scenario. There was no signal, there was no fiber, there was no copper, there was no wireless. We were simply configuring an IP address as our gateway of last resort. And you were right. The 0% of you that answered this one got it absolutely correct. It is 0%. So all of us got 100% of that one right, if we want to look at it that way. The answer we were looking for was indeed layer 3. 76% of you answered that one. That is the correct answer. One of the things you've already noticed today is that we've talked about port numbers. We've talked about protocols. We've gone through gateway of last resort. We've looked at OSI model, and we're just getting a little bit off the surface at this point. Obviously, the exam itself is enormous with the things that we need to know. There are a huge number of videos. In fact, in my Network Plus course, there are 87 videos in my Network Plus course. There's a lot of videos there that you would want to look at. We also have 12 hours total if you were to count everything up. And as much as I would love for everyone to be able to go through every single one of those videos, I realize that sometimes time is an issue. So I've taken everything from every video and put it into a set of notes I call my Network Plus course notes. All of the text from every video is in here. All of the important graphics are in here. All of the important charts, the tables, everything from that video that's important is in this set of notes. Our port numbers, our diagrams, you can see everything is there and in full color. They are available not only in that digital form that you just saw, but I also have a physical form of them. There's a physical set of course notes you can get. They're obviously identical to the digital version, but it's something that you can take along with you that is a physical version of that. And while you are waiting on the physical version, if you decide to purchase that edition of it, you get the digital version for free. So as soon as you purchase, you can of course download the digital version immediately, and then you can wait while this arrives in your mail, hopefully very quickly. They usually get there pretty quick. We have a listing of what we think the ship times might be on the website, so you can know exactly when that might arrive. There's a lot to go through for this exam, and hopefully that can give you a little bit easier way to keep track of all of that information. Available on our website. Go to professormesser.com/NPCN for network plus course notes. It's a great way to support the things that we do on our site. Hopefully something that can also help you get a few extra points on your exam, help you with your study process, and prepare you to earn your Network Plus certification. Let's do another question. We have time for another one. So let's go through the next one on this list. And it says, a network administrator would like to route between VLANs on a layer 3 switch. Which of the following should be configured? Should you configure VPN, SVI, SSID, STP, or 802.1x? A network administrator would like to route between VLANs on a layer 3 switch. Which of the following should be configured? Is it VPN, SVI, SSID, STP, or 802.1x? On a previous question, I did notice in the chat some people were saying, as I was describing the style of questions you might get on the exam, someone mentioned, oh, and they love acronyms, just in case you're wondering. And I thought to myself, yes, they do love acronyms, as do I. So, of course, I have a question that will give you the same feel, emulate the same style as a question on the exam with a bunch of acronyms in it. So to be able to answer this question, a multi-step process, we have to know the acronym. We have to understand what that acronym does, and we then have to see if it applies to this particular question. If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA, lock in your answer, see if you know which one this happens to be. Well, I wonder if we know. I'm watching these numbers go up pretty quick, so I feel pretty good about this one. Usually when people answer very quickly, I feel most of the time that we are doing very well with knowing what this one is. Sometimes I get surprised though. Sometimes I get a little bit more of a what I thought it was going one direction, it zags to go another direction. So we'll see how you do with this one. The question again asks, a network administrator would like to route between VLANs on a layer 3 switch. Which of the following should be configured? Would you configure a VPN, an SVI, an SSID, an STP, or an 802.1x? That really didn't make much sense when I said it like that, but it does make sense. In a moment, we'll go through the details of this. What did you answer? Let's find out. We'll close the poll, and we can see 40% of you, not quite half, but a good number of you, the plurality of you answered SVI as that. We have 22% that say the answer is 802.1x, 14% say STP, 12% say VPN, and just under the double digits at 9%, we have SSID. So we have a few options here. If we go with most of you that answered SVI, 40% of you say SVI is what you would choose. This question specifically is about layer 3 switches. And as many of you know, when we're talking about switches, switches operate at layer 2 of the OSI model. Switches are able to forward traffic based on the destination MAC address inside of a frame. But there are some switches that allow you to turn on an extra feature that allows you to route inside of that switch. Now, this doesn't change the switching process. The process of switching is still working exactly the way it did before. But having a layer 3 switch, as we call it in the industry, allows us to have part of the switch act as a switch and part of the switch act as a router. They are independent in their functionality, but they do work together, especially since you know that if you set up multiple VLANs on a single switch, often you might want to have people on one VLAN be able to communicate to people on another VLAN. But because they're on separate VLANs, they're isolated from each other. By design, that's what a VLAN does after all. So we need something that can connect those two VLANs together. And the way that you connect those VLANs together is with a router. Hey, wait a second, we got a layer 3 switch. It has a router inside of it. So now we can enable the routing functionality. But now how do we route traffic? How do we route IP when we're only dealing with a switch at the MAC address layer? Well, to be able to do that, we need to configure IP addresses that we would associate to each of those VLANs. We refer to these as switched virtual interfaces, or SVI. You have to turn on that layer 3 functionality inside of the device, and then you can enable or have access to assign an IP address to that particular interface. This is the same thing as maybe putting a physical router on the network. You plug that physical router into your switch. You still have to give that physical router an IP address. So instead of having that as a separate device, you just put everything in the same chassis. It's in the same box. And instead of having a separate router with a separate IP address, you have a single device where you're adding that IP address, and you're able to make that happen. That way you don't need a standalone router. Everything can happen inside of one single device. You only have one piece of software that you have to update. You only have one piece of hardware that you have to maintain. And although it is not a full-blown router, there are a number of routing capabilities and capacities that are very different than something that might be standalone and separate. If all you need is just simple routing, Layer 3 switch is going to do that for you. But you may need to configure an SVI, a switch virtual interface, to be able to make that happen. And indeed, 40% of you said, yep, I need to configure an SVI to make that happen. So that is exactly what you would choose. 40% of you chose that one, exactly where you would go with that. We have 22% of you that chose 802.1x. 802.1x is a network access control method where you would have to add a username and password before gaining access to that network. Here, we're just trying to route between VLANs. There's no authentication required here. We're not talking about users trying to connect to the network, so 802.1x would not apply. We do have 14% of you that chose STP, as we've already mentioned in a previous question. STP is the spanning tree protocol. It's designed to prevent loops on a switch network. This question was not about loops on a switch network, so STP would not apply. VPN, a virtual private network. We're all very accustomed to these. Being able to use a VPN, communicate through an encrypted tunnel from one device to another. That wasn't what we were trying to do here. There's no encryption required here. There's no tunnel in this list. We have a single device. We just want to route between VLANs. So we would not use a VPN for that. And lastly, an SSID, only 9% of you chose that one. The SSID is a wireless network name. That is the list of wireless networks that you always see when you pull down the list on your mobile device, for example, or on your laptop. You see that big list of wireless names that pops up is the SSID. That is not associated with routing between VLANs. The only one of these abbreviations that really had anything to do with routing between VLANs was indeed the one that 40% of you chose, which is our switched virtual interface, or SVI. That gives you something else that you might want to work through as you are planning your routing strategy on your network. You might be able to route inside of your switch if you enable that layer 3 functionality. Let's see how we do with our next question. We've got more to go through here. Let's get another one. We talked a little bit about DNS earlier. Let's talk about DNS some more. And this question asks, which DNS record is used to resolve an IP address to an FQDN? Would that be MX, TXT, CNAME, A, or PTR? Which DNS record is used to resolve an IP address to an FQDN? Is it MX, TXT, CNAME, A, or PTR? Number of hurdles that I put in your way on this one. Some of them you can see immediately. First is that the question itself is one big set of acronyms. That's not unusual, by the way. We have a DNS record resolving an IP address to an FQDN. It's just nonsense when you say it like that, but it is actually referring to a real thing. And in fact, This is how we talk to each other in the world of networking. So this is not an unusual way. People all the time tell me that was really, that question was kind of clunky. That question was worded oddly. Nope, that's the way we talk. I guess we're both correct. Yes, it was worded oddly, but that is the way we talk. It is exactly the way we would tell it to each other. So yes, we talk and communicate in the world of networking in an odd way sometimes. And this is a good example. Everything else that's listed here are real DNS records. So I didn't throw in something off the beaten path here. The MX, TXT, CNAME, A, and PTR refer to actual DNS records. So you really need to know them. And this is only a subset of the DNS records that you need to know on your exam. So make sure you're not just familiar with these 5, make sure you're familiar with the others as well and when you would use them. A lot of people locked in their answers here, which makes me wonder how we did for this one. Which DNS record is used to resolve an IP address to an FQDN? Is that MX, TXT, CNAME, A, or PTR? We'll stop our poll. And 35% of you say the answer is CNAME. 26% of you say the answer is A. 24% say the answer is PTR. And then a tie for last place at 7% apiece. We have MX and TXT. You'll notice with this question that this is kind of the backwards to what we would normally do. Normally, you would go to your browser and you would type in www.professormesser.com. For those of you that are triggered by the abbreviations, it's www.professormesser.com. I look forward to your cards and letters. So we type that in our browser. You don't know the IP address of my web server. Hopefully, that's not something we have to worry about memorizing. We type in professormesser.com. We refer to that fully qualified domain name as www.professormesser.com. That's a fully qualified domain name. We usually will abbreviate that with FQDN, fully qualified domain name. So normally we're typing in the fully qualified domain name, and behind the scenes, the DNS is giving us an IP address. But that wasn't the question here. The question is, how do we resolve an IP address and know what fully qualified domain name is associated with that IP address? So it's almost the reverse, the opposite of what we would normally do, or I guess what the vast majority of requests would be to a DNS server. So to be able to plug in or ask a DNS server, here's an IP address, what name is associated with that device, we need a special kind of DNS record. And the record that we are looking for is one that will allow us to reverse what we would normally be asking. We refer to this as a pointer record. It points this IP address to a particular name of a device. And this is an example of a pointer record. This one happens to be for IPv4 right here in the bold. So you can see, for example, there are a number of IP addresses associated with this one. It's kind of hard for me to see. There we go. So for the address number 2, in this particular case, this network is 192.168.23.2 on a DNS server. Everything is backwards, as you can see here. That 2 that's listed there, if somebody sends a request to a DNS server and says, what name is associated with 192.168.23.2, it looks for a pointer record for that .2 and tells you, oh, that's joe.example.com. That's the fully qualified domain name. That's Joe. If somebody said, what is the fully qualified domain name for 192.168.23.15, that's www.example.com. So having that pointer record is an important part of this. Sometimes it can be a little cheeky. For example, let me see if I can even do this on my screen. I want to pop open a quick text. We'll bring up a terminal screen that I have here. See if this works for us. And on my side, I'm trying to give you an example of something you would use. So I'm going to run a command on here that will ask the service to reverse out and tell me the names of the things that I'm working on here. I think this is probably not the best one to use, though. I'm trying to run a trace route, and on the back end, give you an example of trace route resolving some names. And in fact, I have one here. let me show you the end of a trace route that I have in this list. So I did a trace route to 1.1.1.1. And as one of the things you'll notice is trace route is going through its list. It has an IP address that it found in the trace route hop. And then in parentheses, it has an IP address. What this really is if it's able to resolve a name, a fully qualified domain name, it puts the name in, and then it also gives the IP address. For example, it was able to take 208.97.206.13, and there was a DNS record that allowed it to resolve in reverse that AE25-327.CR6-MIA1.IP4.GTT.net. So that IP address resolves back to this fully qualified domain name because there is a pointer record in a DNS server that makes that link. Notice the ones that don't have a name, there's no pointer record in their DNS server, probably by design. The one I like the best is I did a trace route to 1.1.1.1. Notice the fully qualified domain name for 1.1.1.1 is 1.1.1.1. one.one.one.one. You cheeky folks at 1.1.1.1. I think that's a Cloudflare IP address for their DNS server. That is exactly what you would use to be able to provide that. It is your pointer record, PTR. In fact, a number of you did choose that pointer record, but only 24%. So it was number 3 on the list. CNAME, a canonical name, is one where you are finding an alias name for a device. For example, a server could be called www.professormesser.com. I might also use that as a chat server. So you would also refer to that as chat.professormesser.com. Might also be an FTP server. It could be ftp.professormesser.com. So my DNS server could have multiple canonical names or CNAMEs that allow me to use different names for exactly the same IP address. Not really the scenario we were talking about here. The A record is the address record, and it is the one that is kind of the reverse of what this question is asking about. It's the one that we would normally do where we present a fully qualified domain name, and the A record provides us with the address of that particular device, the IP address, and that's what the A stands for. Lastly, we have the MX record. That's a mail exchange record. It points to the mail servers on our particular domain. And then a TXT record can be used for a number of different purposes, either for validation of the DNS server, could be used for anti-spam functionality. There's a lot that you can do with that. But text records have nothing to do with resolving an IP address to a fully qualified domain name. The record that we were looking for was the PTR record, and 24% of you got that one absolutely right. Well, I know that we've kind of hit the top of the hour, but let's do one more multiple choice question on this, shall we? Since we're kind of on the roll, let's not finish with a number 3 on our list as making this happen. I think a number of you might know this one. So this next question asks, a network administrator is segmenting an IIoT device onto an isolated VLAN. Which of the following would best describe this device? Would that be laser printer, core router, LCD projector, irrigation pump, or hypervisor? Got a number of options there. A network administrator segmenting an IIoT device onto an isolated VLAN. Which of the following would best describe this device? Is it laser printer, core router, LCD projector, irrigation pump, hypervisor? If you know the answer, there's your link. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you know what that happens to be. See if this is something that you are familiar with. You may be thinking to yourself, does this question have something that's not typed in correctly? Is there a problem? Nope. Everything here is spelled properly. It's the correct grammar. It's everything it should be. Don't be thrown too much by the terms and the acronyms and everything else we use. Should be something you can negotiate, figure out, work your way through. If you think you know the answer, lock it in. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in this answer. See what that happens to be. For those of you wondering about being able to see PTR records and what they look like and what tools you would use, if you're querying a DNS server, you would probably use dig or you would use NSLOOKUP. Those are two of the most common ones that you would use, and you can use those utilities to query information, such as information that might be contained within a PTR record. By default, you're not able to see the full configuration of a DNS server by default. In fact, that's probably a good idea. So make sure that you are familiar with those commands and how you could use those. Maybe that gives you something to do later. Maybe later on, you want to run through and do some queries that would allow you to see that reverse lookup. Or you could just do a trace route to 1.1.1.1. You'll see it happening right in front of your eyes. Another fun way to do it. Or trace route really to anywhere. You should be able to see that. Trace route over to 8.8.8.8. Trace route over to 4. This is a quad 9. 9.9.9.9 be another good one. There's a few DNS services that allow you to do that. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a network administrator segmenting an IIoT device onto an isolated VLAN. Which of the following would best describe this device? Is it a laser printer, core router, LCD projector, irrigation pump, or hypervisor? We'll close our poll. And 49% of you say irrigation pump, 21% say laser printer, 15% say hypervisor, and then we go to single digits with 9% for core router and 5% for LCD projector. First, we need to get through this piece here. Obviously, we're segmenting, we're isolating devices onto their own VLAN, and the type of devices that we were isolating onto their own VLAN are IIoT devices. You may be familiar with IoT devices, Internet of Things, but there's another category of devices that's similar but different. The similarity is it's a much larger device. The I is the industrial Internet of Things devices. It's not enough to have these IoT devices. IoT devices are a air conditioning thermostat in your home, a set of lights that you're able to access across the network. The pretty lights that are behind me are IoT devices, for example. It's a really good example of that. But in a very large organization, especially if you have industrial equipment, these might also all be connected to the network, and we will need to protect them and secure them in the proper ways. We refer to these as industrial Internet of Things devices, and they, of course, need to have just as much security as any other industrial device might be. So if you have something dealing with air quality, you have some type of manufacturing component, maybe you have a pump like this one that we have on the screen, and it's connected to your network, then you would refer to that as an IIoT device. We see this often in very large scale systems that are doing things for the oil and gas technologies. We have robotics, medical devices. Those are really good example of industrial Internet of Things. Those are devices you don't want to have any type of security issue. We don't want somebody getting into our oil and gas equipment. We don't want somebody messing up a robot, and certainly don't want somebody getting into the middle of a medical device. So it's important to have these industrial devices also protected, ideally onto their own VLAN. And that is exactly what we would like to do with our irrigation pump, is to be able, with this IIoT device, have it on its own VLAN. The other devices that are here certainly have a security component to them. Every device on your network, of course, needs to be properly secure, but only one of the devices in this list is an IIoT device. Laser printer is not an industrial Internet of Things device. Neither is a core router or LCD projector or a hypervisor. So in this case, if you knew what an industrial Internet of Things device was, the answer was relatively straightforward, and about half of you knew that. 49% of you got that one absolutely correct. It is indeed irrigation pump. And if you are working on your N10-009 exam, then you have certainly run across that particular topic. If you're studying for your N10-008, you may not recognize that at all. That was a topic that was indeed added for the latest version of the exam. You've already seen today, we've covered tons of topics that come from the exam, and the topics themselves are all listed out for you. CompTIA tells you everything you need to know to pass this exam. Very unusual, by the way. Microsoft doesn't do this. Cisco doesn't do this. Red Hat doesn't. Nobody else does this. It's very hard to find somebody offering a certification that will give you every single bullet of every single topic that you need to know. So this is where you need to go to get this list. And it's a free list directly from CompTIA. This is the CompTIA exam objectives. Make sure you go out to the CompTIA website and use these, read through them before you start your studies. And perhaps even more importantly, use this as a checklist before you schedule your exam. It will point out very clearly the topics where you may need to spend some additional time with your studies so that when you walk into your exam, you are fully aware of anything that could be thrown at you. You'll be able to answer any type of question in any particular format because you've already gone through and checked off every single bullet that's in the official CompTIA exam objectives. You can find this very easily by going over to professormesser.com/objectives. I have a link that will take you over to the CompTIA website, but you could also go to your favorite search engine, type in CompTIA exam objectives. It will take you, really the first page will probably be that particular view on the CompTIA website. We do one of these study groups every month. We have a Network Plus now. We have Security Plus next week. And then we already have dates for December. By the way, if you were here last week for our A+ study groups, one of the things you'll notice is the dates have already changed. And one of the things I even told you last week, hey, these dates might change. Well, guess what? The dates changed. And as I mentioned, I always update my calendar. I always update the list of events that are in our Discord, and I do that immediately when something changes. So I have also changed the dates here as well. Our Network Plus study groups are going to be on December 2nd and December the 6th. So a Monday and a Friday, unusual days for our study groups, but that's when we're doing it. And then we have a Network Plus study group on the 10th and a Security Plus study group on the 12th of December. Of course, as already mentioned, we also have a Security Plus study group next week. So you're already way ahead of the game if you're someone studying for your Security Plus. We have a lot of Security Plus before the end of the year. And then as we normally do at the end of the year, the last 2 full weeks of the year, we simply are not doing any live streams, but we will be on our Discord. You can always stop by and chat with us on Discord. It's hard to get us away from the Discord. So we're always there and available. But come on back on December 10th. We'll do another Network Plus study group for you, and we'll let you know if any of those dates happen to change over at professormesser.com/calendar. Well, we've come to the end of the first hour, but we're not done yet. I've given you a lot of questions in this last hour. It's time for you to give me some questions, and that's what we do in our after show. You can go to the link at professormesser.com/QA, and you could submit a question that I will answer for you in the next hour. Don't forget about our Network Plus Success Bundle. You can find it at professormesser.com/netsuccess. We also have our discounted vouchers on our website. Go to professormesser.com/vouchers. Another great way to do it. Also, we're on social media. Simply type in professormesser.com/ the name of the site you'd like to find us on, /Discord, /YouTube, /Twitter, /Instagram, /LinkedIn, /Facebook. Wherever it happens to be, we will send you over to the appropriate site. We want to be where you are, so just let me know where you would like us to be, and I'll make sure that we are there as well. Well, that brings us to the end of our first hour. Stick around for the after show. We got a lot more to talk about, and I have no idea what we are going to talk about because you're going to ask the questions in hour number 2. Thank you so much for joining us in this first hour. We enjoyed the questions that you asked. Thank you, chat room, for being here. Hopefully you've learned some things that can help you and get you ready for your Network Plus exam. See you in a couple seconds over on the after show. Stay right where you are. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Network Plus study group. Okay, I'm going to take a sip out of this right here. We will bring you back. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. That was a quick commercial. I should probably fit something in there. Should be a video or something to transition us over to the after show. Oh, then you're getting into graphics and there's a whole post-production thing, and we don't want to do too much, do we? So now let's see what questions you have for me. This is a little bit different. We're turning around this thing. So instead of me asking the questions, you're asking me the questions. The way that you would do that is you would use the same link that we were using before. Go to professormesser.com/QA. And I have for you on that page a statement, and you can see it right here, that says you can submit questions for the second hour of the study group at any time. We'll be moderating questions during the session, so your contribution may not appear immediately. And of course, I'm going to be listing through all of those, looking at those details, having a little bit more information that happens to be there. We've got a lot to go through. And if you go back to that link, professormesser.com/QA, there is indeed a link at the top, a tab at the top for the Q&A that you can submit. And another number of you have submitted your questions already. We have quite a few questions that have come in. Some are heavy hitting. Some are questions about technology. Some of them are questions that have nothing to do with technology. Some people are just interested in knowing things about what I have on this side. In fact, a lot of people will talk to me about the studio itself and the things that we have here. If you want to know what any of these things are that I showed in the pre-show, some folks were asking about my hand shoe mouse. That's the name of this mouse. It's hand shoe because it's the size of a shoe and you put your hand on it. It fully keeps your hand on top of the mouse. It doesn't do that claw thing that you would normally find. It's a big mouse. It's upside down there because the screen, it's just not, now it's huge. It's a monster. Look at the size of that mouse. So it's a very big mouse to have there. If you want to know anything that's there, no, it's a real mouse. It's not a trackball. It's a real mouse. You have to move it around. So it's not great for gaming because it's such a big mouse that's here. Along these same lines, we got a question from Chris who asked the compelling question of iPhone or Android. Well, it's a bad answer because I have to make sure that my videos work across all platforms, that they work on Windows, that work on Mac OS, they work on Linux. Are they going to work on an Android device? Are they going to work on iOS? So I have a little bit of everything in the studio that I can use to test with and things that I can use to be able to make work. But my go-to is an iOS device. So iOS is pretty much everything for me. Well, when you look at the studio itself, we often talk about the Apple ecosystem. This is certainly the Apple ecosystem. The device that's in front of me is an Apple Studio, an M2 Max, no, Ultra, M2 Ultra, I believe. We'll make sure. I'll bring up the About Us. Or the About screen for the hardware so you can see it. It's about time for an upgrade as well, but that's what we're running. So these two screens that are in front of me, the one that is directly in front, the one just to the right, are all connected to that same system. And it's primarily Mac OS is what is my daily driver, if you will, for all of that. Because of that, fits very nicely into the iOS ecosystem. Everything talks to each other. I can browse on the phone, and when I sit down at my desk, I can throw it over and it pops up on the big browser that's local. Phone calls can be answered on this. And I realize these days we're getting more and more parity with all operating systems, and for both mobile and desktop, we're able to really do a lot of this across multiple operating systems now. It's just that it all works on the Apple side. That's sort of the mantra for folks that use Apple, is it just works. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. It just does what I tell it to do, and it does it very, very well. And that's the reason that for most of what we are doing and what I am doing, it's iOS, it's iPhone for pretty much everything. There's a new studio that we think is going to come out the beginning of the year. So hopefully I am waiting for that new M4 on the studio. They skipped the M3 chip. So the one that I have now, I told you we were going to do an About This Mac and we were going to look at it. So let's do that. Indeed, my About This Mac shows, well, there's not much you can see here. There we go. So my About This Mac Studio, an Apple M1 Ultra. That's what I'm running right now. It's from 2022, way back in the day. Way back in 2022, 128 gig of memory. There's my Mac OS that I'm running, latest Sequoia. It runs like a champ. It really does run like a champ. It has been a horse. It has really been a great computer. So I'm excited about the idea of upgrading. I'm not excited about paying the cost for upgrading, but it's one of those where I have something I want to do with the existing M1. So it's not a waste. It's not like I'm losing anything by it, but it's a really good example of finding the right mix of hardware to make this whole thing go. And it's like having a boat. You're constantly upgrading. You're constantly thinking about a new something. There's always something to add to the list. It's the challenge. Let's go back to your questions. Keep going through this list. So let's go through and understand what your questions are. This is a question from Anonymous. I say that because it's spelled Anonymous there. It's Anonymous, who says, while prepping for the N10-008, I'm finding I feel fatigued after the multiple choice questions when I start tackling the performance-based questions that I've skipped. Would it be better to spend the time with a fresh mind on the performance-based questions and be able to focus on simpler questions for the rest of the exam? Both strategies are good. The goal here when working through the exam is that you need to find the process that works for you, and everybody is different. This question, by the way, is really about how the questions on the exam are presented. Now, if you've never taken a CompTIA exam, when you start the exam, the first set of questions that you get, the first handful of questions, somewhere around 3 to 7 questions, are going to be performance-based questions. They're not multiple choice. So they are questions with multiple steps. Maybe it's a drag and drop. Maybe they put you at a command prompt. It's not pick A, B, C, or D, or E. So that means that you will need to probably spend a little bit of extra time on the performance-based questions. They usually are a little bit more involved than a multiple choice question might be. There's a couple of different strategies people take because of that. Some people feel that you can look at them, but you should skip them. And that's one advantage you have with a CompTIA exam is you can jump to any question on the exam at any time. So you can skip through the questions that are there and just go straight to the multiple choice and work your way through them. Some people like starting with those, what people consider easier questions. I don't necessarily agree with that description, but they like to go to the multiple choice questions first and work their way through. I will admit I'm part of that group. I like to jump to the multiple choice questions and go through them. And here's why. Because eventually you'll need to work your way back to the performance-based questions. And because the performance-based questions are relatively involved compared to multiple choice, some of the topics on the multiple choice questions tend to jog my memory about things I need to know for the performance-based questions. So I'm effectively using the easier part of the exam, or at least easier to understand part of the exam, to answer the harder questions. But a lot of people get worried about the time because there is obviously a time management issue you have. You have to leave enough time at the end to go back to the beginning and work through those questions. So that becomes a real problem. So how would you then change that? Well, you start at the beginning and work your way through the performance-based questions as quickly as possible. And then once you get through those, you get to what Anonymous calls the easier multiple choice-based questions. Both strategies are good. And it really depends on how you like to work. And it really depends on how much time you think you're going to need during the exam. Some people go through these exams really fast. They read very quickly. They understand exactly what they're looking for. Maybe they've been in the industry for a long time. They're able to center in on exactly what they need to know, and that's what they go with. But other people like to be able to skip over all of that and go through all the multiple choice questions. I think there is also a misnomer, if you will, or at least a perceived misnomer in how these questions are graded. And I think people have not incorrectly, but perhaps inaccurately decided that performance-based questions must be worth more than multiple choice-based questions. They must be more valuable questions because they seem like they must be for no other reason. There's no basis in fact, because we have no idea how these questions are graded. We have no idea if performance-based questions are worth more or less than a multiple choice question. And what is the ratio? Is it 2 multiple choice questions equal a performance-based question? Or is it 3 performance-based questions equals 4 multiple choice? There's no way to know. CompTIA doesn't explain the grading process to us, nor will they ever. So that's not something that we really can worry about. We have many cases. In fact, I wouldn't say many. We have at least one case where someone said they started their exam, skipped over performance-based questions, went all the way through the multiple choice, and then realized they were out of time before they even had a chance to go back. And they still passed their exam. So it's really a good example of how our perceptions of the grading on this exam may not necessarily match the reality of how these exams are graded. And as I mentioned also, we have no idea how one exam is graded versus another. All we know is each question is worth a different number of points. That's all we know. That's it. So I would really encourage you, as you are trying to figure this out, don't worry about the grading process. Instead, like the question for Anonymous here, worry about the strategy you should be taking that will best position you to get the best score. And I think that's the most important way to do this. Find the strategy that works for you and then use that strategy on the exam. Some people prefer multiple choice-based questions first. Some people prefer performance-based questions, and you get to decide either way how you would like to do that. More questions, shall we? Let's keep going through this list. This is a similar, let's just take this as sort of the next step in our list of things. Let's say you've now gone through all those questions, you finished your exam, and you passed. You are now Network Plus certified. In that Network Plus certification, it's good for 3 years. It's a certification that has a time frame associated with it. But CompTIA allows you to renew that certification for another 3 years. And you can keep renewing it for another 3 years until you're tired of renewing it, I guess. So there is a way that you can simply renew that. But it's not just a single way to renew. And the question from Jen asks, howdy, thanks for your work. Got my A+, going for Network Plus in December. I was hoping for an explanation and crash guide to CE's, continuing education, and how it works. Let's talk about continuing education. Fortunately, the CompTIA.org website has an entire section at the top that clearly is stated continuing education. Continuing education gives you a number of different ways to renew, and they have a nice breakdown of the renewal process. The first one is, how do you renew? And there's more, as I mentioned, there's more than one way to do this. Some ways might be better than others, depending on what you do during the day, where you happen to work. Are you going to school, or are you short of time? Is your certification, is it expiring tomorrow? These are important questions to consider, or expiring soon. So they give you an overview in here and the process of how to renew. And let's click on the how to renew part, because I think this is a good summary of how to renew. You can renew with a single activity. This would be to take a CompTIA exam. So in the example we saw before, that question that came up was from an individual that had already had their A+, and they were taking their Network Plus next month. Well, if you take a higher level CompTIA certification, that could potentially renew your A+. So you would not even need to use continuing education units. There's a lot of other things you can do here. Also, complete CertMaster CE, earn a non-CompTIA IT certification, pass, take the exam again. It is not something I recommend, but you could do that. And there's a comparison of all those. You could also renew with multiple activities, including this one. So I didn't even mention it in the first hour, but now that we're an hour and a half into this, I guess I can give you my continuing education unit breakdown for this. If you would like to earn a 1 hour of a webinar category CEU, the way you can do that is to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. There's a link there that says Contact Us. In that Contact Us link, put your name, your email address. In the subject line, put November 2024 Network Plus. And in the body of the message on the line by itself, put the super secret code words of the month, renewal path. renewal path is the super secret code words of the month, and submit that. And I will, in about a week, turn that around and get it over to you. So you've got a few options available. Now, because there are so many different ways to renew your certification and so many different ways to find the optimal way for figuring this out, I have a video for you, of course. There's a video, it's in the YouTube video description of this video and any of my study groups, how to renew your A+, Network Plus, or Security Plus certification in just a few hours. It's really focusing on using the CertMaster CE to renew your certification, but I step through all of those other methods as well and give you advantages and disadvantages of figuring those out so that you can figure out for yourself which one of these would really be the best way to renew for me. So I would recommend you have a look at that as well. Have a look at the CompTIA website, and that video that I created really summarizes everything quite well. I would highly recommend you have a look at that. That would be a good place to give you a primer, a nice overview of everything you need to know about the renewal process, and then you can drill down into each one of those individually if you need to. So for those of you, again, that are working on renewing, the way that you could do this is go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. Click on the Contact Us link, put your name, your email address. The subject line should be something like November 2024 Network Plus. And in the body of the message on the line by itself, put those super secret code words I gave you earlier. Let's go through some more questions you might have. Let's have a look at these. Let's see if you happen to know on this list. This is probably one that is super common from my good friend Yummy. Yummy Yum Yum sends this in and asks, hey, should I take Network Plus or CCNA? Also, I'm bad at networking. Well, we're all bad at networking. So that's just normal, by the way. It's not obvious when you get into networking how challenging it happens to be. And one of the great things about networking is some topics within networking are incredibly difficult to comprehend. But the more time you spend on these topics and the more familiar you get with these technologies, the more valuable you will be in this industry. It certainly helps. This question, though, is a good one. Should I take first Network Plus or CCNA? And it's a very common question for this. The challenge is that these are not interchangeable. These are not similar exams. It's not similar topics. It's not even similar difficulty. These are two very different certifications that are focusing on two different parts of networking. Network Plus is an entry-level certification. It's designed to give you the nomenclature, the common terms that you would need to understand how they work together, little bit of command line, little bit of troubleshooting, and get you familiar with talking with other people about things that you would find in networking. CCNA is the Cisco Certified Network Administrator certification. It's a popular certification in the world of networking, but it is definitely not entry level. CCNA is more of a next level up. I don't necessarily want to call it intermediate level, but it is certainly a higher level and more complex certification than Network Plus. Network Plus would be for someone that was getting their first job in networking. Maybe they're getting a job on a help desk. Maybe they're getting a job at a network operations center, and they're trying to learn the basics of that particular world of networking. But once you get into that role and you think, well, I'd love to be a network administrator. I'd love to configure switches. I'd love to become more familiar with managing and troubleshooting routing networks. I want to be able to work with these technologies on the network for wide area networks. Well, then CCNA would be a good next step. CCNA has that hands-on, detailed configuration and troubleshooting of switched and routed networks. So if you're somebody who is already jumping into the world of network administration, then you might want to start with CCNA. But if you're someone who needs to first get the basics first, start in a job that would be at a NOC, start in a job that would be at a help desk, or the very entry level in networking, then Network Plus is clearly going to be the better choice for you. As I mentioned, these are not interchangeable. It's not that one replaces the other or one's any better or worse than the other. They are two different certification exams that focus and address two different types of requirements. You just need to find the one that fits your requirements and then pick the right one from that list. Everything is is important depending on where you are in the industry and what you are doing. And not everybody has the same decision that needs to be made along those lines. So make sure you make the decision that makes sense for you. There are people on the internets that will tell you, oh, you don't need to take this cert. You need to take this one. They've never asked you about where you are in the industry. They didn't ask you what type of job you have now. They didn't ask you what you want to do. What do you want to be when you grow up? They've not asked you anything. They've just decided for you. That is the worst possible way to make a decision. You need to really examine both of those, understand their advantages and disadvantages, and then compare that to where you happen to be and what you want to be able to do. Let's do some more questions on this list. This is a pretty good one. Since we are talking about getting that job or getting that better job, this is from D. D says, hello, Professor. Could you please share some tips for a good cover letter? This is, by the way, when I first started bringing up cover letters, I did not realize quite what level of controversy I was putting myself into. Some people are very passionate about how they feel with cover letters. I don't know why. I don't understand where the challenge is with this, but let me give you my philosophy on cover letters and how they fit into this scenario. And then we can talk about whether that's a valid philosophy or not. I very quickly want to make sure, and it is part of this video. If you look in the YouTube video description of this video, there is a link. There's two links in there you probably would be interested in. One of those links is to a video called 5 Reasons Why Your Resume Keeps Getting Rejected. The other video is a follow-up to that called 5 More Reasons Your Resume Keeps Getting Rejected. So there's 10 total reasons that I put together on why resumes are getting rejected before anyone has a chance to look at them. One of the reasons, and I want to say it's in the second video, it's in the 5 More Reasons, is a video, a section of that video describes and talks about cover letters. A cover letter is a letter you put on top or goes with your resume that you are submitting to a third party. Some people say, why are you doing a cover letter? It's a waste of time. Nobody's reading it. Nobody cares what you put on there. And I would say the vast majority of cover letters aren't worth reading. I'm speaking primarily as someone who was and still is, someone who hires, and I look through resumes and have been doing this for a very long time in this industry to find the right technical match for the positions that are open. One of the things that I rarely got was a cover letter. And the cover letters that I used to get were cover letters like this. Dear Sir or Madam, to whom it may concern, I look forward to submitting this resume for your consideration for the position of network administrator. I feel that my career in this field positions me well for the requirements associated with this job. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. Sincerely, applicant. Just very generic. It's a cover letter that could go on every resume they submit. And I would argue it probably is a cover letter that goes on every resume that they submit. It misses an opportunity. So I would certainly say there are places that don't read the cover letter. I'm sure there are people out there that don't, but they're missing an opportunity. Not just the people accepting the application, but the people submitting the application are also missing an opportunity. Anytime you have a chance to put your information of any kind in front of a person to evaluate, you've got a chance. You've got a chance to sway them. You've got a chance to catch their eye, to get their attention. And that's what a cover letter should be used as. Cover letter should not be a throwaway. It shouldn't be something that you just include with your resume that you shotgun everywhere. Every cover letter should be customized, and it should be customized for the job that you're applying for. Now, you may be applying for a lot of different jobs, and I'm not saying that you're going to spend an hour customizing a cover letter. In fact, you can customize a cover letter in 5 minutes. And in the video, 5 More Reasons your resume keeps getting rejected, I give you a scenario where we're doing that. The cover letter style that I think might be a good one for you to consider is something called a T-style cover letter. All you have to do is Google that one. You just have to look for the T-style cover letter. What this really is a cover letter that says, I've seen the job posting you have for a network administrator. Here's why I think I'm best qualified for this. And on the left side of the page, you list all of the requirements, or at least the important requirements that you pulled from the job posting. Years of experience in the field, knowledge of this manufacturer's switches, an understanding or certification with Network Plus, and whatever else they were asking for. You list those on the left side. And then on the right side, you explain how you fit that requirement. They want 5 years of experience doing this. You can say, I've been working in this industry for 10 years, primarily in the role of network administration. Next on that is, what's the other one I gave? It was a knowledge of a particular manufacturer's switch. Say a Cisco switch. Knowledge of Cisco switching. Then you would put on the right side of the cover letter, I've spent 6 years in a primarily Cisco-oriented company, and we have a great implementation, a large implementation of Cisco switches. You might even name the specific brands and models with that. Third on the list, you got a Network Plus certification. I've been Network Plus certified for 2 years. Here's my Network Plus certification number. So you're listing out and proving that you are the person they should be talking to. Anytime you have the chance to show that level of detail to someone who hasn't even looked at your resume yet, you're giving yourself an advantage over someone who did not submit their cover letter. Now, if they're not looking at cover letter, there's nothing lost there. You're pretty much at the same place that everyone else is. But there are a large number of hiring managers and HR professionals who do look at those cover letters specifically because you went through the process of submitting it. So there's your chance to look better, sound better, and position yourself better than anyone else who has submitted their resume. And for everyone on the internet who's simply saying, don't put in a cover letter, you don't need a cover letter, don't submit a cover letter, I love those people. Thank you, people who don't submit your cover letter, because that gives me an advantage over you. Having the certification in my pocket, having the cover letter on my resume, all of these things work together. The hiring process is not fair at all. It is not fair in the least. It is a battle. It's a war. You are at war with everybody else who is submitting a resume, and you need to use every possible advantage available to you to give yourself whatever type of leg up that you can. And if it's spending 5 extra minutes to create a customized cover letter, especially if it's for a job that I am a great fit for, why wouldn't you do that? Of course you should do that. So I give you those tips. A T-style cover letter, that's the one I recommend. Go have a look at that. You could say that that's a waste of your time. You could say it's not something you should even do. You should say that it's something you should be spending your time doing other things. That's a perfectly reasonable approach. But I am speaking as someone who has been a hiring manager for systems engineers, who's looked at these technical resumes and has tried to break apart who's better or worse than somebody else. Not only are you describing that you're a better technical fit, you're also describing that you are a better communicator. And I got to tell you, in the world of IT, we need more communicators, and we like hiring communicators. So more chance that you have to be able to communicate in a written form, hopefully get an interview, go in and then communicate in a spoken form with someone and have stories to tell and talk about the firewalls that you've installed and talk about the reports that you've run and talk about the implementations that you've put together. That's very, very valuable stuff. Being able to do that positions you above and beyond anyone who is not doing that. Highly recommend you focus on that. That's my opinion. That's my philosophy on cover letters. Maybe it's something that resonates with you. Maybe it doesn't, but you get to make that final decision anyway. let's keep going through this list. We got more questions that have come in. If you'd like to submit a question, follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA. You can submit a question at any time and be able to have it in this list. I can consider putting that up on the screen. As I mentioned in the beginning of the study group, we're in this transition period between the 008 exam for Network Plus. It's one that is retired on December 20th. So we're coming up a little bit more than a month, and that exam will be gone forever. So a number of people are looking at both of these, the 008, the older 008, and the newer 009, and they're thinking about where are the changes? What is different between the 008 and the 009? And that question is one that is also posed by Richard, who asks, is the 008 all that different than the 009? To what extent can I use study materials for the latter to study for the former? Well, this is a question that comes up quite a bit. And I will say that my overriding philosophy with study materials is that you should always be studying from the materials that match the version of the exam that you plan to take. So if you plan to take the 008 exam, make sure all of your study materials have been written for the 008. If you're planning to take the 009 exam, all of your materials should be written for the 009. But is that really valid? Does it really make a difference? Well, let's look at what the real differences are between these two certifications. I have gone through the entire set of exam objectives. I have summarized and put every single exam objective, every bullet that's in there, I've listed out for the 008, and I've done the same thing for the 009, and I've compared and contrasted the two. I know what exam objectives are the same between both of these. I know what exam objectives are in 008 and not 009. I know what exam objectives are in 009 and not 008. So some great statistics can come from this. And when you have statistics like this, how can you not have a Venn diagram? And that's what I created, was a Venn diagram for the 008 exam. That's the larger circle on the left. And the 009 exam, that's the smaller circle that's on the right. The size of the circles is directly associated with the number of bullets, the number of objectives that are listed in the official CompTIA exam objectives. So for the 008, there are 590 objectives. There's a little bit of rounding that I did here, but that's effectively the number, 590, compared to 430 on the 009. It's a little bit of a smaller exam. In fact, the 009, as I state here, contains 27% fewer objectives than the 008. It's a quarter smaller. It's less to learn, if you will. They tried to make it a little bit easier for you, quite honestly. But how much is the same or different between the two? Can I just use a 008 book with 009? Well, here's the numbers. Of the 590 objectives on the 008, 300 of those are only found on the 008. Of the 430 objectives on the 009, only 140 of those are exclusive to the 009. That means that if you're planning to take the 009 exam or you're planning to take the 008 exam, 290 of those, about 2/3 of the exam topics, are shared if you're planning to take the 009. You could look at it that way. But let's say that you were planning to take the 009 and you had a 008 book. You'd be learning a lot of stuff that doesn't even show up on your exam, and you'd miss another third of the exam topics don't even apply. That you miss completely if you're studying for the 009. So that's why I tell people you really need to use books and study materials and videos and labs and Q&A and everything else that you use needs to match the version of the exam that you're planning to take. And that's why, even though there's quite a bit that's the same, 2/3 from the approach of the 009, 2/3 of the 009 exam are topics that were already on the 008. There's a whole third of the exam you miss if you're studying from a 008 book. And that's a lot. That's enough to fail you on the exam. So I would not really be willing at all to put you in a position of using the wrong study materials. That's primarily why I tell people, do not put yourself in that position. Make sure you only study from materials that match between both of those. I think that's a pretty important thing to consider. Let's do another question. Keep going through this list and how they fit. Okay. Let's do another one from Anonymous. It's more of a networking question, which I love. Questions that ask, can you explain the difference between subnets and VLANs? This is a common question. It's a common conundrum we often run into in the networking industry because these are the same thing, but they're not. Let me explain. Let's break these two things out. So let's look at VLANs. A VLAN is a way to separate broadcast domains on a layer 2 switch. It's a layer 2 function. A VLAN is a grouping of devices that are specific, that have their own broadcast domain on a switch. We're not talking IP addresses. This is just MAC addresses on a switch. It's a grouping of MAC addresses that you put in their own little area on that switch. And you can, of course, have multiple VLANs on a switch and their own little separate ponds and their own separate, the important words here are their own separate broadcast domains. That's the important part. Anything that's a broadcast that's sent out on one VLAN will only stay on that VLAN. If you send out a broadcast on a VLAN, that broadcast will never make its way to a different VLAN. So they are separate broadcast domains. Subnets are different. Subnets operate at an IP address level. So these are separate IP subnets that operate independently of the VLANs. How? Because they're at layer 3. However, in practical application and practical implementation, an IP subnet and a VLAN are matched with each other. So an IP subnet is almost always going to be, and should really always be, part of a single broadcast domain. So although they are operating at different OSI models, different layers of the OSI model, although they are working with different protocols, they're operating at different parts of the frame that we're sending across the network, they're almost always combined with each other so that an IP subnet and a specific VLAN number are always matched with each other one-to-one. And I say almost. I have seen some particular networking implementations where someone has taken a single broadcast domain, a single VLAN, and within that single VLAN, they have put multiple IP subnets on the same VLAN. Now, the crazy part of this is that it works. That's not beyond the realm of usability. That's how IP works, and that's how it works with these particular broadcast domains. But it really complicates the process of management. It complicates the idea of how many devices you would put on a single VLAN, because broadcasts are broadcasts, especially at the MAC address level. And it would almost, it kind of allows multiple subnets to communicate with each other, even though they're not on the same subnet, and could potentially cause networking problems. But perhaps one of the biggest problems I have with it is that it's just too complicated to figure out what's where. When you have multiple IP subnets on the same VLAN, you're not doing it right. The only time I've really seen this make sense is if you are migrating people to a new IP address scheme. And you might start with, or at least as an intermediate process, put everybody on the same VLAN and then carve them out onto their own separate VLANs with different IP addresses next week on a very short time frame. You would never do that for a long period of time. It's just too complicated to figure out what goes where. And as I mentioned before, could potentially cause networking issues. And that's the problem, is that you're going to have some type of networking problem eventually. Somebody's going to say the network is slow. Somebody's going to say, I can't communicate to that host. Somebody's going to say the internet is inaccessible. Somebody's going to say that a particular site on the internet is inaccessible. Was the problem with your weird multi-subnet VLAN that you've created, or is the problem with something else, which it certainly could be as well. It's a problem on the firewall. It's a problem with a route on a routing table. It could be anywhere. And it just complicates the whole troubleshooting process. So if you have a short-term requirement, you could put multiple IP subnets on a single VLAN. I really would highly recommend you don't even do that. I would really recommend you keep them separate and keep your IP subnet and your broadcast domain on a 1-to-1 ratio. And if you do that, you're not going to run into any of those weird problems. It makes the troubleshooting process so much easier. That pain that you hear is pain that I'm reliving. So don't do that. Don't put yourself in that position, then you won't have the pain to relive. So my pain can be your benefit. Let's just make sure that you aren't put into that position. Everything will be fine. Let's keep going through this list. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. We got plenty more to go through, but we got more to have in this list. Thank you for those of you that have sent me notes asking about the CEU. We got that one in there. So thank you for sending that in and reminding me as well. Let's talk about this one. This is a good one because it's sort of a broad question about the industry itself. It's from Preston, who asks, I'm working on the CompTIA A+. I have 6+ years help desk experience in the past, mostly kept up with technology since then. Would you recommend the Network Plus if my ultimate goal is cybersecurity? Whatever cybersecurity is. I still am not quite sure what that really means, but I interpret cybersecurity, the term, in our context as someone who is working in an IT security role, someone who is responsible for protecting the data and systems for a particular organization. The term cybersecurity doesn't have a definition. People will tell you all the time that it does. It doesn't. It's vague. It's a broad umbrella for anything security related in the world of technology, which doesn't help us at all. just call it security at that point. But when we're focusing on Security Plus, we're really talking about IT security. We're not talking about programming security. We're not talking about application security. We're talking about security of our infrastructure, security of our devices, security of our data, primarily. So this question, though, would I recommend the Network Plus if your ultimate goal is in that world of IT security? And I would say by far, for anyone who's at all interested in the world of IT security, and it's a fantastic, very fun part of the world of security. My most recent background in this industry is in the world of IT security, specifically around next generation firewalls. It is an amazing part of IT. Had a lot of fun working with these firewalls, implementing these firewalls in some of the biggest networks in the world, talking to IT professionals who deal with this every day. It's just a remarkable part of what we do in our industry. One thing that is a foundation of IT security is networking. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have now been tasked with keeping secure all of your data, all of your systems, all of your people, all of your devices. So you have some technologies available to help you with that. You have a next generation firewall. We just mentioned firewalls. Every organization has a firewall. Many organizations have more than one. And very often in very large organizations or even medium-sized organizations, firewalls are implemented in a fault-tolerant form, in a way that there is always a backup available. We have redundancy with our firewall, so that if one firewall was to break, the network would still be up and running. We have a secondary firewall that can either take over or one that is both firewalls are constantly running at the same time. We refer to those as an active-active if both firewalls are running at the same time, or active-passive if one firewall is always running and then when it fails, the other one realizes that it fails and it picks up where that one left off. Now, implementing those firewalls in both of those scenarios have a very different network implementation. There are different requirements for routing. There are different requirements for the interconnectivity between these devices. There are different requirements depending on where the firewalls are located. Are they in the same building? Are they in different buildings? Are they in different data centers? And there are a number of interesting layer 2 and layer 3 requirements depending on how you put them into your network. Well, all of that implementation, all of the design, all of the planning associated with those firewalls, everything that I just mentioned, hardly any of that was security related. Practically all of that was a network question. How do we integrate this with our redundant switches? What type of routing, if we're going to have the firewall as a layer 3 device, what type of routing is required on that device? What IP address do we assign to the device already? Oh, and is the next generation firewall also going to be a VPN concentrator? I should probably configure it with a separate set of VPN IP addresses. We need to configure it with the directory services so that it can verify people's login. We also need to make sure that this device is configured with the proper certificates. These are all networking things. So a lot of the foundation that we often fall back to in security is this very broad and very deep foundation in networking. And if you're going to be good in IT security, if you're going to have any knowledge of how to implement any of these technologies, you need to have a very strong foundation in networking, from my opinion. So I think that if you're working your way and security is at all interesting to you, and you would love to get a job working and doing something in IT security, I would highly recommend that you begin gathering as much knowledge as you can in the world of networking. And I think that becomes very, very important when you get to that point. Here's a good example of this, by the way. I worked with an SE manager at Palo Alto Networks, and their method of troubleshooting, or not troubleshooting, their method of interviewing, they'd bring someone in for a potential interview. They're hiring an SE, a systems engineer. Systems engineers in this world are responsible for listening to customers' concerns, the things that they're trying to accomplish, and then you explain how your technology can solve those particular problems. Not just talk about it, but physically install the firewall and make it do the things that they need it to do. So you have to have a very intimate knowledge of the capabilities of these devices and be able to install them, configure them, set them up, connect them to the network, provide that redundancy, provide the separate devices, have them fail over properly. All of that has to be set up in the proper way. And when you're hiring somebody, then you need to make sure the people that you're hiring are familiar. And the first question that he would always ask of a potential systems engineer is, tell me everything you know about ARP. It's not a security question. It's not even really a cybersecurity issue question, is it? There's nothing secure related about ARP that we need to know. But in the world of networking, ARP is a bit of a workhorse. It's a bit of a multifaceted protocol and can be implemented in many different ways. There's ARP, there's reverse ARP, there's proxy ARP, we can keep going through these lists of things. So when he asked the question, tell me everything you know about ARP, do you talk about how the traditional ARP process works? What does the ARP frame look like? What about these other ARP types? When would they be used? Is there an ARP type that you would not commonly see on the network? All of these things come to mind. You could spend an hour talking about ARP. And that's what this manager wants to hear from people. How far do they go down this road? How many different flavors of ARP can they talk about? Because we run into this all the time, especially if you're setting up a next-gen firewall, it's performing network address translation. There's ARP concerns there. You've got a VPN configuration with a head-in on the concentrator, its IP address. There may be ARP concerns associated with that. We didn't even talk about gratuitous ARP. There's another very good example, especially when you have redundant systems. A gratuitous ARP, a GARP, is another part of that. So there's where you get into the world of networking. So from that perspective, Preston, I would highly encourage you that if you are looking at the world of IT security and that you are at all interested in VPNs and firewalls and reporting and compliance and all of the things associated with this, make sure you get that very strong networking foundation. I was fortunate enough to jump from a company where all I did for years was understand protocol analysis, reporting, and knowing what happened at the protocol level with everything going across the network. And if you're somebody who's really spent time with Wireshark, you know exactly what I mean. Being able to start a packet capture that data, and then decipher what it's telling you. That is a huge amount of knowledge that you can gather in a very short period of time that tells you everything you need to know about what's happening on the network. And once you understand things at that protocol level, the rest of the network makes perfect sense. It's that screen on the matrix when everything's flowing down the screen and somehow they're able to understand what's there. Once you understand it, everything is obvious. And that's how I really do feel about protocol analysis. We've kind of missed, I think, in our industry, the need to do more at the protocol level. I think part of it is that so much is now encrypted, but a great deal of it is not. And I think the more you know about just IP and TCP, don't even get into the application protocols yet. If you can look at a protocol decode and understand what is TCP doing right there? What is this windowing that's happening? What is this reset that occurred? Why did that reset occur? These are important questions. And then on top of that, who did what? What are the time frames here? Am I seeing any delays? Where are those delays coming from? Why did those delays occur? These are important questions as well. So once you understand and can almost look at a network without doing a protocol decode, you can almost look at the network and you know what's going on under the surface. To the point that if you did a protocol decode, it would simply verify what you already knew. That's when you know you're ready for IT security. So that's what I would recommend doing. Learn as much as you can. Go get that Wireshark and go work with it a little bit. The more you know about things at the protocol level, the smarter you're going to be when you're troubleshooting these application problems. They're going to tell you it's the network. Hey, the network is down. Hey, we're having a problem with the network. The network is slow. Network. It's never the network. It's never the network. So you need to be able then to figure out what it is. I think a lot of people say it's the network because that's the only thing they can't see. They have no idea what's going on that wire. It's like magic. Well, then if it's magic, it must be broken because I can't see it. I don't know what's going on there. So I think we can properly say, yes, the problem really is DNS. That's a different question. This is a different problem entirely. Let's keep going. I know that we're at the top of the hour. We're going to get another question in here. There were a couple more that came in that sounded pretty good. In this list, let's have a look at what people are doing in this list. This is a part of the exam, and I think it's worth mentioning. It's a question from Dezu asks, am I going to need a calculator for the subnetting questions on the N10-009? You know, when you start looking at subnetting questions, there's all this binary to decimal conversion. We have to start counting in binary and borrowing bits and recalculating what the decimal might be. And we have CIDR block notation. There's a lot you have to do there. And although I think some people feel because of that, a calculator would make things easier, I think a calculator actually would make things a little harder. I think it makes it more difficult. There are a number of shortcuts that we use in this industry for subnetting. And they're shortcuts that we kind of get accustomed to very, very quickly when you start working with it. They're shortcuts that when somebody's talking about a subnet that they're working on, that you're already calculating in your head, oh, that's 64 devices per subnet, which means we have delineations at these IP address node numbers. And we know everything on this range is all going to be on the same subnet. So you're already calculating this in your head. So obviously a /24 network, super easy to do in your head. But for somebody like me that I used to work on a /26 network, I can calculate it in my head, no problem. It's really more about repeating it over and over and over again. And it suddenly clicks one day and you start to really understand where these delineations are and just how simple the setup is. There's very quick ways to do this. In my course, I show you two very popular types of subnetting calculation shortcuts. One that is used by many people from the Cisco book. They like the magic number method, which is a perfectly reasonable method. I have a variant to the magic number method that kind of takes magic number and takes the math out of it, so that all you have to do is either add one or subtract one. So I guess technically there's math, but that's not really math. That's easy. You don't have to have a calculator for that. And so my 7-second subnetting method was designed for me. I designed it for me because I didn't like to do math in the middle of a certification exam. And I had needed to take a Cisco certification exam, which traditionally is pretty heavy on the subnetting side. And I needed to be able to calculate these things very quickly without there ever being a chance that I miscalculated, that I added something or multiplied or divided something wrong. So if I'm worried about, am I multiplying something wrong or dividing something wrong? What if we got rid of the multiplication and division? That's what my 7-second subnetting is. So it has a little bit more moving parts in it. There's a little bit more you have to know to be able to use it, but I can write out the charts that I need in less than a minute. And now I have everything on my exam to be able to very easily point on one part of the chart, the other part of the chart. I have the answer. We go to the next question. And I don't have to think, ooh, did I calculate that right? Because when I'm in the middle of an exam, I don't do well on exams. I'm not a good exam taker. Many of you are this way. I know because you've told me. I get very anxious before going into an exam. There's a lot of anxiety there. I spent money on this exam. I'm walking into this strange place. I'm sitting down. I don't know what's going to be presented in front of me. It's the fear of the unknown. And the exam starts and I can't even think. There's just too much adrenaline going through the system. I'm reading the question and yet it seems like it must be written in some other language. No, that's English. It seems to be words I recognize, but I can't seem to put the words together into anything that makes any sense to me. So I have a lot of different things that I do to get past that and to resolve that before the exam even starts. You probably do as well. We've talked about some of that in the past, but one of the things that I always run into is if I get to a subnetting question, I worry that I'm doing the math wrong and therefore getting the rest of the question wrong. But if I have a way where the math is already done for me and there's no possible way to mess up the math because there is none, that's the method I went with. That's my 7-second subnetting method. And you might find a method that's even a third method, or you may be able to take both of those and come up with your own way of doing it. Great. That's perfect. Find the way that works for you. I get people sending me emails all the time. I tried your 7-second. I hated it. I tried magic number. It was great. Fine. I don't see where the problem is there. You found something that worked for you that was great. That's what you need to use. And that's the reason I put both of those methods in my video series. Now, let me give you a bit of a caveat, however. And to do that, let's use something like our exam objectives. So let's look at the exam objectives real quick, just to put this in context, because context is important. This is domain 1 of the exam. These are all the things you have to know in domain 1: OSI, router, switch, firewall, content delivery network, cloud gateways, service models, protocols, port numbers, IP addresses, unicast, Okay, no subnetting there. Next page. All these bullets: wireless, wired, hybrid, mesh, traffic flows, private, public. Okay, finally in here, sort of down here in section 1.7, we have variable length subnet mask and classless interdomain routing. Finally, we're getting into what it clearly states as subnetting. Of the Network Plus exam, it's not part of section 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, or 1.8. It is a part of a section of 1.7. And then in the rest of the exam, domain 2, section 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, no subnetting. Section 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, no subnetting. Section 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, no subnetting. Section 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5, there might be a IP address question in there or incorrect subnet mask or something that might have something to do with subnetting there. Maybe you would get a subnetting question associated with that. And then you're through all of the objectives. So there's the number of subnetting questions you could possibly get on a CompTIA exam. I would say for Network Plus, you might get 3 subnetting questions or questions where you needed to do some level of subnetting. You might get 2, might get 1. You might not get any because there's way too many objectives and only 90 possible total maximum questions you can get on your exam. So I see a lot of people spending a lot of time going through iteration after iteration of subnetting challenges, of gnashing their teeth over trying to figure out the best way that works for them. They've spent weeks going through subnetting and trying to figure out the details, and they're still wrapped around the axle. And if you find yourself in that particular situation, my professional recommendation for you is just to ignore subnetting. Throw it out. Pretend it doesn't exist. You might get 3 questions on your exam about it. You might get 2. You might get 1. You might not get any. So I think it's more of a time management issue. I'm not saying that subnetting is not important, because obviously subnetting is important. And if you want to be a technologist working in the world of networking, you need to be able to subnet in your head. You simply do. And you will be able to, because it will be one of those things that you just do over and over again. Don't you know what your phone number is? Don't you know what your address is? Don't you know the phone number of the people in your family? What's their middle name? There's things you already know. They're just sort of locked into your brain. Subnetting will be one of those things you already know that's locked into your brain. Do not worry. But for the purposes of your exam, if this is a real struggle for you, spend your time learning anything else on this exam. Spend a day on subnetting, and once you're through with that, go to the rest of these exam objectives. You could learn hundreds more exam objectives in the time that you were normally spent trying to figure out the world of subnetting. It just doesn't make sense from a time management perspective for this exam. That's what I would recommend. Really, really important for you to focus on these. I think if you're somebody who is with not just with subnetting, but with any topic on the exam, make sure that you don't spend any huge amount of time on any single topic. That's just very broadly a good idea. And if you do get wrapped around that, I think you'd be fine. I think that's really the important part of this. And focus on those things that are important. Focus on other topics. Focus on anything else but going through all of those subnetting questions, and I think you'll be fine. You don't get a calculator on the exam anyway, so you're going to need to do it by hand, or you need a shortcut that can get you through those questions very, very, very quickly. That's an important part of that. And I know that we're sort of going into overtime here, but I want to see if there's any other questions on here that are important. This is a pretty good one, and being able to work through all of these. So this is from Anonymous, and a question I think a lot of people have, which is, have you ever had technology withdrawal? I think the concern that many of us have in the world of technology is that there's a lot of it. Every organization has a ton of technology. And if you are in the IT department and you're responsible for the desktops, the servers, virtualized systems, the cloud-based systems, the network, the security systems, and everything surrounding them, it's a lot of technology. It's a lot of things to know. We're just talking about Network Plus today. Still, just this is a lot to know. This is really the challenge that you will find yourself in, is you will be constantly challenged with a deluge of technology, especially when you get into a new realm of technology you've never stepped into before. And that's going to happen, of course, because there are new technologies appearing all the time. There was a good example is 10 years ago, who was talking about the cloud? There was some talk of virtualization, but now that's all we talk about. And technologies we were working with back then may not even exist today. So you will constantly be rebuilding yourself, rewriting yourself, relearning new things, and maybe even not having to worry about some of the older things that you've learned because technology is simply moving under our feet all the time. So it's very easy to have just an overload of this and be in a position where it's just too much. Have there been times where I have wanted to leave the world of technology and go outside and raise goats? I think all of us have. At some point, you will hit that point where maybe being an alpaca farmer isn't such a bad idea. You're outside, there's fresh air, you can set your own hours. There's some great benefits there, but not everybody is in that particular position. I think when you get into those roles where someone is really pushing you and overloading you to that perspective, it might be time to look around at a different position. When in my career, I have worked for corporations and organizations that really did push you to your limits. They really were trying to get every bit of juice out of that particular orange. And it's always a challenge to be able to manage work and non-work, work and home, work and family, whatever it happens to be for you. The thing that I found was I just needed to get out of that particular environment. Some environments are just not right for you. Some people really love those. There's a fast pace, something always to do. There's an urgency associated with it, and some people excel with that. And if that's you, rock on. Do that. That's what you should do. Some people don't like doing that. I found myself getting into a role where I was doing more systems engineering, where it was representing a particular company's product, understanding at a technical level everything that that product does, which is a lot of fun to really dive into a product and know a product at that level. You become effectively an expert in that product or series of products. And understanding it at that level and being able to just talk to people about this. A lot of what I did in my job was going from office to office to office, meeting with different people, telling them about the technology that we had and demonstrating what it really does. And then if they say, that looks great, can we plug this in on our network? Yes, let me bring in an evaluation system. We'll spend a half a day plugging it in. I'll show you how to run it. We'll leave it with you a week. We'll come back and see what you think. That was the primary part of what I did. Now, it sounds simple just to say it, but everybody's network is different. Everybody has a different set of requirements. Everybody has a different type of lab implementation they would like to see. And they have a different set of requirements that are important to them that they would need to see this product do if they're planning to buy this product. And that's what I was representing. So if they're not buying, then you're doing something wrong. You need to take their requirements, show them this does what they need it to do, and then ask them how many of these they would like to buy. That's how the process usually works. So, but what the fun part is doing the technical part of it is sitting down with their technologists and plugging it in and really seeing what this stuff does. Never the same day twice. It's always something interesting every time you plug into somebody's network. Well, one of the nice parts about that is there was most of the time that is a business day task. So if you're somebody in technology who doesn't like being on call, this was a great job. And I don't like being on call, so this was a great job for me. But it also requires more travel, requires you to be much more knowledgeable than anybody else in the room about this particular product. You will always be asked things you do not know. I'm not sure how many people handle that in general, but you have to become very accustomed to telling people, I have no idea. That's something we should find out, and I know exactly who I should talk to. Let me find out the answer to that, and I'll get back to you. Let me call you tomorrow. Let's meet again on this, or we'll find out later today and see if that makes sense. But most of the questions people present to you better be questions you can answer. especially when it comes to how do we implement it in this particular scenario. Can we plug it in at layer 2 and have redundancy? How would I connect it at layer 3 and have it in an active-active format? How should I configure my switches so they automatically will switch over when we lose the first active firewall? These are questions you need to know. So you have to be the expert in that technology, whatever that technology happens to be. So that is a good example of finding the right role for your personality, finding the best way to find a job that's not going to burn you out or create that withdrawal. Because I think if someone ever gets into a place where they're just not happy in the role, and we all are there at some level in our career, then you need to make that move. There was a particular position I was in with a very large company, very large software company that I worked for, where we were one company, then we got bought. We made multiple acquisitions. Then another company bought us, and then a separate management team came in. There's just constant movement in these technology companies there's the only constant is change. And so you're always having some type of restructuring, redesign, a different set of managers, a different set of expectations, and you kind of had to go with the flow. Not everybody can do that. I don't do it very well, but I was able to at least get a bit of a feel for it. But there at one point, with all of these changes occurring, with all of these acquisitions, a bunch of new managers came through. They all had different ideas about what they wanted to do. Some would pull you some direction, some would pull you the other. And at some point I thought to myself, well, this is not fun anymore. I am not enjoying myself. Everybody finds themselves at some point in their career. And I thought, I need to get out of here and do something that I enjoy. I need to go back to doing something that is fun. And that is going to be a constant watchword for you. You will constantly be looking for that. And I think in the world of IT, we do a pretty good job of this. You've got your LinkedIn. There's all the people you've always worked with. And you always keep track of what everybody is doing. There's a real important part of technology is the non-technical part of it. The people is really the best part of technology, ironically. The people that I've worked with in my career have been some of the smartest, top-notch people that I have been happy to learn from and been happy to talk with and know and keep up with and send emails to and just say, how's it going? And what's nice about that is that when you're in that position where someone says, I'm not happy with this job anymore, you can reach out to them and say, I think I'm ready to make a move. Any buzz? Hear anybody got any positions out there? Because in our industry, we tend to know what people are doing what. We tend to know, oh, you know what? I heard that company X down the road has a couple positions that just came open. You should check in with them. I got a friend that works there. Go call this person, contact that person, see what they're doing. We do this all the time in our industry. And I think that's a great thing you should do. One of the questions in the chat room said, was that your midlife crisis? No, this happens all the time at any point in your career, not just a midlife thing. This is about what's happening in your particular job at that particular time. And you need to be prepared constantly in the world of IT to be able to either look at making a move or make the move. And I think a lot of people you'll find in the industry are always keeping their resume updated. They may be perfectly happy and not planning to go anywhere, but their resume is updated because tomorrow there could be a press release. Google has acquired the company you work for and they're firing everyone. It just happens all the time. So we need to be prepared for any contingency, and it's always nice to have that there. I think that gives people a little bit more of a direction. You have a plan. And if those types of things happen in this industry, and they will happen, that there will be a management shakeup, there will be a change to who owns the company, there'll be a change to something. But if you know that you've already ready for it, that helps. That helps you sleep. That helps you through your day. It helps you be a happier person. And who doesn't want that? No, my midlife crisis had nothing to do with any of that. Did I really have a midlife crisis, though? I guess at some point I had to, right? Had to be a midlife section, and there had to be a crisis. I don't recall what it may have been. I don't know how those would work. Everybody has a different way of dealing with that, I guess. Did you get your sports car? Did you get the new wife? I don't know how that works out. I didn't really do either of those. So I guess I just kind of slid right through that one. I missed the whole thing. I sat through another hurricane season in Florida. That was my midlife crisis. Well, that's a normal year in Florida. Yes, it is. That is a normal year in Florida. Speaking of which, next week on Wednesday, we are scheduled to have our Security Plus study group. Our Security Plus study group is something we do every month. This one will be on Wednesday of next week at 12 noon Eastern. As I mentioned in the pre-show, there is a storm that is going to be in the Gulf of Mexico over the next few days, and it's heading this way. So, as I always mention, if you ever want to know when the next live event is going to be, we might still be having our Security Plus study group on Wednesday of next week. And I fully intend to do that as we sit here today. But it might change. So always check in to see when our next live event is going to be. You can always find that on our website at professormesser.com/calendar. If you have enjoyed this live stream and you would like to see more of what we are doing, we would love it if you give it a thumbs up. We would love it even more if you were to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are very rapidly approaching 1 million subscribers. We would love to have you part of that 1 million in our YouTube family. You can find that on our site, professormesser.com/YouTube, or do it the other way around, youtube.com/professormesser. I think both of those will work. But certainly you go to our website. There's links in the upper right to get to all of our social media sites. When I'm done here, I'll be over on Discord along with a lot of you and a lot of other folks as well. You are more than happy to join us in our community there at professormesser.com/Discord. It would be a great place to keep track of what everyone is doing. And it's a great place to study for your Network Plus. Another nice place to go if you're trying to get some of these odd questions answered about this world of networking technologies. Well, I think that brings us to the end of yet another live stream. Thank you so much for being here. We love doing these live streams and we could not do them without you. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you over on the Discord side. If we don't see you there, we'll see you next week on the Security Plus Study Group. Thanks for joining us. See you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Thanks, everybody.